Well, thank you for joining us today to learn more about Vermont's Child Protection Data System. My name is Amy Rose, and I am the Policy Director for Voices for Vermont's Children. As an independent, multi-issued child, youth, and family advocacy organization, we spend a lot of our time listening. We hear about the hard things that people living in Vermont experience every day. We believe that knowledge is power. As we enter our 40th year at Voices, many of our priorities will center youth voice, economic justice, and equity. The presentation today will focus on our IT system for the Family Services Division at the Department of Children and Families, a system that was launched at around the same time as Voices for Vermont's Children. Voices sees our current IT structure as a barrier to best practices and looks forward to learning more from Carlie Thilbault. Carlie has graciously agreed to share her expertise with us today. We are going to record this presentation, as I've heard from many people who were unable to attend today, but are interested in the information that will be shared. Please add your thoughts and comments within the chat. We likely will not have time to get to all of them today, but we'll commit to following up as we continue to learn more. Thank you, Carlie.
All right. Thank you so much, Amy, for that introduction. And again, thank you all for providing this space for us just to share more about kind of the needs within Family Services Division, as well as where we'd like to be in the future. I'll throw the PowerPoint up shortly, but I do just want to say quickly, our Deputy Commissioner, Ayrka Radke, was also scheduled to be here. However, we have some pretty significant stuff happening in our high-end system of care right now. I mean, we have for the last couple of years, but it's really just kind of increasing this week. And so she was pulled into a meeting with the Secretary's office that she's not able to miss. So she sends her regrets. She has been an amazing advocate for our system needs, and I can't thank her enough for that. So please don't take her absence as her, not kind of sharing how important this is. There's just a lot of really important things happening right now. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll put the presentation up. Bear with me a moment just to make sure that it is correct. Okay. So thumbs up if you are seeing the presentation. Great. I was going to say, Linda, that was a hand. The first thing I just want to say is that you're going to see a lot of information in this presentation. I generally am someone who feels like less is more in a presentation. I hate when there's a lot of text there. But I really wanted to make sure that when people are watching this, watching this recording who are not here, or even for those of you who are here, that you can pause the recording on a slide of particular interest, and all the information you need is right there. I didn't want you to feel like you needed to kind of scribble notes frantically during this time. I will be speaking a bit fast just to make sure that we get through everything. And I will also be able to provide the PowerPoint to Amy a bit later this week so that she can send that out with the recording. So just know you're going to see a lot of information. I'm not going to read all of it, but it was designed so that folks can be looking back at it and not scratch their heads and say, what did this mean? I really wanted it to all be included there. So again, thank you so much. And I'll get started. Right. So I thought it was important to start a little bit around just kind of level setting where we're at. So Family Services Division currently utilizes two main data collection systems. And those systems really kind of touch all aspects of a case. And then there are two additional kind of primary systems that have a bit more of a narrow focus. We'll be learning a lot more about all of those systems shortly. But I think it's important to know that those two main systems, so FSDNet and SSMIS, and I will break those acronyms down soon in the next few slides, that they are systems that don't communicate well with each other. What you're seeing now are quotes from staff. And the feeling is felt by everybody. Information is entered into SSMIS, it goes into FSDNet, it does not come back. This is not a two-way channel. They really function in different ways. They don't talk to each other well. They're obsolete in many ways, and there are significant room for errors because of the manual entry required in all of our systems. We do not have case management systems. We have data collection systems. We have data entry systems. They do not function for us in an automated way. We really have to tell them what to do. So in addition to those kind of primary systems, we have several other systems that our staff are required to enter information into or are required to access to pull information out of. So we have, over 10 different systems that we're touching, either that live within FSD or outside of FSD, external systems that we are required to enter information in to track our case practice. We also rely really heavily on Excel spreadsheets, and it's embarrassing to say that, but it is true. There's not an easy way to enter the majority of information related to casework into our current systems. And so instead, we rely a lot on spreadsheets, and we'll talk some about those spreadsheets. Because of the lack of integration within our systems, as well as knowing that so much information lives in, saved documents, it really puts us at risk for not being able to meet the federal requirements that are changing regularly. In fact, we are already out of compliance with some of the most recent federal changes that stemmed from a 2022 change. And we are continuing to collect federal financial penalties because our systems are not up to those requirements. We are also stuck at times even meeting our own state requirements. So a quick example is around raise the age, right? Our hope was to be able to accommodate older youth into our system in 2024. And what we know is that right now, we can't even track youthful offender cases in our main system in SSMIS because we cannot add new case types to that system. And so we had to say, for many reasons, but also from a system standpoint, we cannot accommodate that population. We would be doing a disservice if we did. Again, we are required to manually enter data in multiple systems because it does not transfer from one to the other. So we are relying on our staff to be impeccable in their data entry, both in one system, in the next one, and making sure that that information lines up. And that is a heavy weight to bear for folks who are already bearing such heavy weights. It also makes it really difficult for us to extract information. I supervise the quality assurance unit. We are responsible for the majority of state and federal data, and we still rely on the Agency of Digital Services developers to pull much of our data for data requests that come in. And even then, a lot of times we are not able to actually meet the full data request. And I know there are folks on this call who have felt that from us before, right? And who have experienced the impact of FSD's system not being as functional as we need it to. Again, it just creates a lot of redundancies. It creates a lot of data entry errors, and it creates a lot of pressure on our staff. So, again, that was a little bit of an overview of kind of some of the challenges, but I wanted to dive a little deeper now into those systems, just so you have a bit of an understanding of them. So as I mentioned, we use kind of 4 primary or main data collection systems. SSMIS, the Social Services Management Information System, went live in 1983. So it is 40 years old at this point. It holds all of our case-related demographics, substantiation information, our foster care licensing information, our adoption, termination of parental rights information. But again, it is a data collection system. It is not a case management system. We have to tell it what to do to make sure that it does it correctly. And even then, we need to make sure that we're spot checking regularly. Very few people have access to this system because of the clunky nature of it. So that is another challenge. So the information that goes into SSMIS then feeds into FSD-Net, or our Family Services Division network. That is the system that our caseworkers primarily use. This is where they enter their case notes. And it is also where we track our investigation and assessment information. That is all held within FSD-Net. It does not speak back and forth. And so that investigative information then has to be re-entered into SSMIS so that there is information in there as well. So those are the two systems that really stem across all of our casework. They touch any spot in it. There's also the DCS, the data collection system, and that houses our safety decision-making tools. So this is one where workers are, when a case, an intake first opens, or if there's a change in an ongoing case, we are required by policy to complete certain safety decision-making tools. They might sit and fill that out at their desk on paper after they've kind of worked through it. Maybe, you know, they're a little bit more tech savvy and they're filling it out in Word, but then they have to enter that data, that same data that they just put on that paper sheet, into the DCS, because there is no automated functioning between those two things. So again, that's redundancies. We then also have the Youth Assessment and Screening Instrument, or our YASI. So that is a standalone system. The DCS and YASI do not speak to FSDNet or SSMIS. We are fully required to input all of the information. And that system, specifically YASI, is utilized with our juvenile justice population. It is a juvenile risk assessment tool. It measures risk, needs, and protective factors for at-risk juvenile justice involved youth. Workers log the information in there. It then provides some of those kind of risk levels as well as areas of strength. The caseworker then takes that information and has to put it into a case plan or into a case note. And again, just kind of creating some redundancies there. And I think, you know, it's also important to note that while the information does flow from SSMIS to FSDNet, it doesn't flow back. Again, this means that our important child safety related information is only available really in one spot, and then needs to be entered into SSMIS if there is, let's say, a substantiation or an unsubstantiation. So if you haven't seen it before, this is a kind of a picture of SSMIS. As I mentioned, this was implemented in 1983, so it's a 40-year-old system. This is an example of our face sheet. This is the first thing that our admin staff touch when they are setting up a new case. It is how we track the information of our primary and secondary caregivers. It is how we try to track the information if rights have been terminated and we want to be able to pull back and see, okay, who were those biological parents? It's where we keep also our child related information, all of the demographics for the children that we are serving. I want to note that you cannot use a mouse in this system. You are completely dependent on tabbing on your keyboard, moving through it. And there are many situations where really you just have to back out. You can't even kind of go back to what you were doing. You honestly just have to kind of close the whole thing. As you've heard me mention, some of the key functions here are our child demographic data, our case assignment. So when a new case opens, it's opened into here and it's assigned through there. All of our Chapter 49 reporting outcomes, so substantiations and you know, cases that were not substantiated, that's all tracked here. It then feeds into the Child Abuse and Neglect Registry. So that is you know, another important function of SSMIS. It holds our adoption information. It also holds our foster parent licensing information, as well as being responsible for our foster parent reimbursements, our vendor reimbursements, and our foster parent expenses. And just kind of as an estimate, SSMIS is responsible for roughly $35 to $60 million a year in foster care reimbursement. So it's a pretty significant amount of money that this system is responsible for. And that is just one thing that it is responsible for, paying foster parents for the work that they are doing. I think it's also important here to note what is not included in SSMIS, just so you have an understanding of that as well. Residential and group home licensing information is not in SSMIS. There is no place in SSMIS for this to live. Instead, it lives in paper files. Foster parent training information lives in paper files. Identified mental health needs, physical health needs, education needs, social emotional needs for children does not live in here. Same with medical, social emotional treatment needs for parents does not live in here. It lives a little bit in FSDNet, and we'll talk about that next, but even that is very limited in what it has. Safety plans are not inputted in here. Actually, they're not input anywhere other than the paper file. Identified services and referrals do not live in here. That is all part of the paper file. And case planning information and case plans do not live here. It is all part of the paper file. So then thinking about our primary system of SSMIS, right, that feeds our data into FSDNet. FSDNet is really a more of a secondary system. While it is the primary one used by the majority of our casework staff, again, it is really only able to house case notes and child abuse and neglect information. We put all of our federally required face-to-face contact information in here for our custody cases. Our health intake information, which is accessed by the Vermont Department of Health, is in here. That is also a required standard, right? That when our children enter custody, someone is gathering their medical information so that we don't lose sight of that. So that does live here in a document that cannot be updated once it is submitted. So the Department of Health cannot go back and update that document if the child had a new doctor's appointment or new diagnoses. And it is really a standalone not referral, but a standalone assessment in that it cannot then be dropped into case notes. I mean, a caseworker is able to open it and print it and put it in the paper file. There is not a way to store it electronically so that it's accessible. As you heard me mention, we also have our youthful offender case tracking in here because currently we cannot add a new case type in SSMIS. And we also house juvenile record sealing here within FSDNet. And again, this is not a case management system. It is a data collection system. Even though our case notes are entered into here, we can't extract information easily. You know, what a worker would have to do, and what we have had to do before, is open up all of the case notes and do like a control F, find me DV, right, in this family. Find me any note that has domestic violence related to it. That is the only way I would be able to know if this case that I am working on has a domestic violence history. And there could be 12 pages of notes, right, that I would have to then as a worker be going through if the case is transferring to me or if it's opening kind of new to me. So you know, while we can enter our notes and we can track our intakes, that is really kind of the end of it in terms of how we can use it for us. We then have several other systems, again, that I mentioned, either that we are responsible for within FSD or that sit outside of FSD and we have to put information into. So an example is for our interstate compact cases. So if we have a child in custody placed in a different state, we then have to enter that information into the NEIS system, the National Enterprise for Interstate Compact Exchange. And then vice versa, the sending or the receiving state is going to then be entering it there as well. So that means if we have a kid placed in Vermont in the custody of a different state, we are also needing to use that system in addition to our own. We are using a different system to enter our time. We are using a different system to access Medicaid and health insurance information for families to help determine FORI eligibility, which again then ties back to our federal drawdowns. So, you know, just trying to give you a sense of the different places our workers have to go and our staff have to go to get the information they need for one case. And then the Excel spreadsheets that I mentioned. So we have over 30 Excel spreadsheets. So this is not an exhaustive list. This is just kind of an idea, give you a little sense of some of the work that we are holding in spreadsheets. You know, as the case practice has evolved more recently, SSMIS and FSDNet have not. And that means that we cannot rely on them to track the work that we are doing related to different changes. And so we are having to track it on paper. So things like our serious physical injuries are tracked in a spreadsheet. Yes, it's entered into case notes in FSDNet, but the only place that we could say how many serious physical injuries did we have during a time frame is by looking at a spreadsheet that a staff member is maintaining in addition to their regular work. Our residential placement information, it is in both SSMIS and FSDNet, but if you wanted to quickly know all of the kids that are placed in a residential setting, you can't really do that. You can't quickly do that. And so the team who supports more of the residential work keeps a spreadsheet for their own purposes, just so they can have up-to-date information rather than relying on the system to tell us that. Our human trafficking information is captured in a spreadsheet. Our indicator data, which then feeds into our federal data, are captured in spreadsheets. Balance and restorative justice information are captured in spreadsheets. And as I mentioned, really, it feels like monthly now, I'm involved in helping a unit create a new spreadsheet to track work because our systems don't do it for them. And they're wanting to know more about their outcomes, right? I'm in the domestic violence unit and I want to know what impact we have when we are working with families. I can't tell that right now from our systems. And so instead, I'm going to start tracking that in a spreadsheet. My staff are now going to take time out of their day to enter some information in this spreadsheet, just so we can know if this service is having an impact or not. And I think that is just so important to state, right? When we're thinking about increasing our outcomes and what we want to see and what we want to be able to provide for the children, youth, and families we serve, as well as our staff, we are just so stuck with our ability to do that. So that was a kind of down and dirty overview of our current systems, just so you can get a sense as we move through the rest of this PowerPoint, why some of these challenges exist. So thinking about the overall financial impact, the first thing I really want to say is it is incredibly hard to truly understand the financial impact of our system because of the limitations within it. So what do I mean by that? I mean that I know that we are out of compliance with federal reporting. I can't easily see, though, anywhere in our system how much money we are paying because of that. I know that we are leaving money on the table because our system is not able to be compliant, but I can't calculate that. So I think, you'll see on these next few slides some of the attempts that we've made to get at this, but it is a piece that's missing, and it's really because we can't get at it from our system. And so that alone is just a huge challenge. Despite this, though, we know that the time that staff spend going through these redundant tasks while utilizing our systems certainly result in significant wasted personnel dollars and time that could be spent supporting families, or even time that our staff could spend supporting their own families, right? I think we really focus a lot on wanting to ensure that we are providing the best services possible for Vermont, and that is true. And our staff is part of Vermont. And right now, we are just increasing their workload every single day. So I wanted to start the kind of financial discussion by talking a bit about the lack of opportunity that we are seeing around leveraging federal funding. You can think of this as money left on the table. So a few years back, our federal government created some guidance that allowed states for the first time ever to draw down federal funding on cases that were not custody involved. Historically, it's only been custody cases where there was a federal reimbursement. So they opened this up to non-custody cases. While Vermont was able to implement kind of the majority of this so that we are drawing down some federal funding, it took a significant amount of time to get us there. And it also requires our staff to enter a significant amount of data, and really specific data. And if they miss a date, that funding turns off and they need to kind of re-enter everything, right? So yes, we're there, we're drawing some funds down, but what we know is that we are not drawing down nearly as much as we could be. And instead, any of that money is coming out of our general fund, right? We're not able to use federal dollars for that work. And so we're not able to offset those costs. Similarly, related to the Family First Prevention Act, specific to the prevention services, one of the things that states are able to do is draw down federal funds to reimburse the money they are paying for service providers who are part of FFPSA, right? And we've entered into contractual agreements with them. Unfortunately, our system, so SSMIS, is not able to accommodate that right now. So we will not be able to draw down federal funds for prevention services, likely until we have a new system. And even if we were able to make some changes, we'd probably be looking at well over a year just within our current system because of how long it takes and the intricacies, and similar to traditional candidacy, we would know that we're not drawing down as much as we could be, because it's another situation where there's very specific information required to meet those federal requirements to draw down. And we can't ask our staff to do that. And even when we do, we still know that mistakes are happening. And then also connected to FFPSA, Family First Prevention Act, is QRTP, the Qualified Residential Treatment. So that allows states to draw down money for payment for residential placements. So right now, Vermont is able to draw down federal funding for the first 14 days that a youth is placed in residential, if that youth has met other criteria. And then it stops after that, because we do not have any QRTP compliant programs right now. We also, within our system, are not QRTP compliant. So this is one that has that's impacted by things beyond just our system, right? There's a judicial component. There is, an assessment component. New positions would need to be created. So I want to make sure that part is clear. SSMIS is not the only reason that we are not drawing down funding for our residential placements, but it is a significant barrier, because the is, again, just so specific that we had looked at a couple of years ago. Do we create a position just to enter the data to get it right? And so we are no longer drawing down federal funding for residential placements beyond 14 days. And so that is a significant hit to our budget currently. And I believe that went into effect in October of 2021, but I'm not 100% positive there. It could have been last year, but either way, if you're looking at our budgets, you'll see a really significant difference. And it is because we are not QRTP compliant. Again, other reasons for that, but a big one is also within the system. We also know that, we are missing money, we are losing money, and then we are having to pay back money because our system does not have, so SSMIS does not have enough checks and balances in place, because it can't, it's really limited in what it can do. Again, it's 40 years old. We will draw down inaccurately at times, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But just over the last 2 years, some of the money that has been impacted includes, for the last 2 years, we have not met the federal threshold for our face-to-face data. Some of this is a system challenge, and some of it is also a worker capacity challenge, right? Vacancy challenges. But one of the issues with FSDNet is that once a case is closed, you cannot enter case notes and have them count as face-to-face. So if a worker is a little delayed in getting their case notes in, even though they saw that child during the month, our system cannot count it as a face-to-face contact. And we saw an increase in that this year, and we have no ability to change it, right? And so what we know last year is that we had a 1% reduction to our Title 4B funding. I can't tell you how much that is, again, because of our system limitations. We've been trying to figure out the exact amount, and we're not able to. We are awaiting then what our percentage reduction will be for federal fiscal year 23. We did just submit that data last month or earlier this month. We know that we did not meet the threshold, and so we will have another hit to our funding stream. As you heard me mention earlier, we are continuing to be out of compliance with the different federal changes. So back in 2020, the federal government made required changes to the way that states collect and submit their foster care and adoption data. So AFCARs, adoption foster care information. We are required to submit these twice a year, and it is a driver for our federal funding. Not the only driver, but one of the drivers. We could not make the necessary changes in time to change the file format. That was one of the things they said. We had to submit the file in a different way. So we had to submit the file the old way for 2022 or for our 2023 A file, and we've already received the notice saying that we will be penalized for that. And we knew we would be, but we had no option. For our 2023 B submission, so we just submitted a few weeks ago, we were able to finally have the file format changed, right? It was a several month process. But because of all the data that is now required to be collected in order to kind of meet the compliance levels, we are not there. We submit a file with a lot of blanks. We submit a file with a lot of missing information because our staff has not had the ability to change with that, and our system has not had the ability to capture it. And so one of the things we are doing currently, because we don't know what the financial penalties will be yet, but there is a period where we can try to correct some of the information and then resubmit. So one of the things that our staff, who are already overworked and are overburdened, are doing this month, because we gave them about 3 weeks to do it once we found out, is they are now updating about 1,000 pieces of data in SSMIS so that we can avoid one federal penalty within our AFCARS file. There's more than one, but there's really only one that we can actually make a difference on. And so that is what we are focused on right now. So some additional stuff that's happened, again, just in these last 2 years, right? And we've, there's much more prior to that, but I really kind of wanted to narrow our focus in a little bit. So in 2018, we had our federal Title IV-E audit for our foster care side. We failed that audit due to issues within SSMIS. SSMIS was not correctly turning off IV-E drawdown when it should be on kids. So what that means is that we were continuing to draw down federal funds when we shouldn't. We still have not been able to fully fix that issue. We are federally required to fix that. And because of the capacity within the Agency of Digital Services, capacity within FSD, but then also the fact that we have one developer in the state who can work with SSMIS efficiently. There's another developer coming up to speed, but they still do not have the full understanding of it. We still don't have that issue fixed. The next audit is in June of 2024. And we don't know yet if that will be fixed by then, right? And so we're still in our program improvement period. We have not met that need yet. And what that impact is for these last couple of years is significant staff time spent on attempting to fix it, as well as we are continuing to draw down for you when we shouldn't. And then we are having to pay that money back to the federal government, often out of our general fund. Recently, we identified a roughly $2 million error just because of one coding issue in SSMIS that has lived in the background that people were not aware of. It again resulted on us drawing down for funding when we should not. A human doing the work kind of caught this error, figured it out. We had to then really look into it, fully understand it. And what we know is that we can't fully fix it. And we are still requiring our folks to be just impeccable in what they're entering, to then look and make sure that it has been updated, and then to submit a ticket if it seems like maybe it's not correct. We are relying on our staff to do that. And we will have to pay that $2 million back, likely out of our general fund. We're still awaiting the final federal kind of communication around that. They know, they're aware, and it is looking like it will need to be paid back and again out of the general fund. And then just another piece of information that I think wouldn't normally kind of come to your mind when you're thinking about kind of the financial impact. But because we do not have a data system that allows us to actually house all of the information we need related to case management, we are paying a company roughly $2,000 annually to store some of our required documents. So you heard me say that we cannot enter our residential licensing information into SSMIS or FSDNet. That has to be available to our staff though. And so we are paying for that to be stored. Every month, more files are added to that, which means every month the price goes up and every year the price goes up. So while $2,000 feels a little like small peanuts when you're thinking about, $2 million, you think about how long we've had to do that and how long we will continue to have to do that until we have a new system. That does start to add up, and that does take away from funding that could be used for other things. We also have maintenance fees related to FSM or FSDNet and SSMIS. We did some time studies recently, just as we were trying to dig a little deeper into the impact. The team that I am part of is responsible for kind of the upkeep, maintenance, and kind of adjustments to SSMIS and FSDNet. We work directly with the Agency of Digital Services. We pull together all the information. They do the coding work. And so I looked into just our team, my small team of 6.5 folks. We have a part-timer, and found that 5.5, so right, that half is that part-time position who's actually dedicated to something else, spent 404 hours during an 11-month period just working on updating, maintaining, and fixing SSMIS or FSDNet. We have a special code, time reporting code, supporting FSD systems that we use when we are doing that work. And so that equated to roughly, and this is a rough estimate, so salaries are different between workers, but a little over $11,000 just in those 11 months, just on my team trying to support the system. And then when you go a little bit further, you see that in a 12-month span, not that same time period, but October of 2022 to October of 2023, ADS developers, so Agency of Digital Services developers, spent over 3,000 hours working just on SSMIS and FSDNet related work for a total of over $100,000. And so for those of you who don't kind of know how the budget works, the Agency of Digital Services does not necessarily have their own budget. They are funded by all the departments, right? We are their clients, DCF as their clients, FSD, Economic Services. So we fund their budget. So we are paying the developers for this, in addition to all of the other things that we are paying for. And we also are continuing to, have an increased ADS around this and around the developers, the one developer who knows the information. And we are seeing our budget for ADS increase every single year. And some of that's normal, right? We would assume that every year, right, due to inflation or any of the other things that are changing, that any of our budgets would be kind of moving up. But we are seeing that, I think, quite more substantially, and we will continue to see that if we just sit with SSMIS and FSDNet. We also had to shift a position on my team. We reallocated we reclassified a position to be elevated to really focus just on maintaining SSMIS and FSDNet. We needed an expert to support that and really be available for that work because of how much more of it we are holding. This is not why the quality assurance team was created in family services, but it is what we have really become. We have really become a pseudo business application support unit because we are the only ones who understand the system in the way that it needs to be understood. And even then, our own understanding is very limited. We also paid ADS just under $300,000 in our last fiscal year to maintain our system. And we are still not meeting our federal requirements, right? So we are paying money to have the system updated the best we can, and it's still not getting us far enough. And then we are still paying money somewhere else because of the limitations within our system. And again, we are really reliant on one developer who knows the information, knows the system well enough. And that developer is not just FSD specific. That developer serves all of the DCF departments because that is how ADS works. They are consolidated and then they support. They do not work specifically just with one department to the next. There was also a new position created, I believe last year, it may have actually been earlier this year, within ADS to work just on SSMIS, right? They recognized that their developers were not able to manage that workload. And so they were able to find funding to create a position, and that position required the new employee to have knowledge of the code base that's used within SSMIS. That position was never filled. I think maybe they had one or two applicants, but those applicants didn't meet the threshold because the purpose would be that they could just come in and jump and that our regular developers would not have to then spend months training them, right? And so because of how old SSMIS is, they're not teaching it in colleges anymore. So our staff, who are typically young, I think coming out of college, or those who are our new staff, don't even have the education to work in this system. And so they're not applying. We're seeing vacancies in the Agency of Digital Services as well. And just some other important things to note is that, in 2016, SSMIS was inaccessible for about a week. We were not able to enter data into it. Anything that had already been entered in could be seen in FSDNet. So we could look up and see case notes, right? We could see some demographic information for families, but it did require our staff to duplicate a lot of processes. They had to keep paper tracking of everything and then had to go back in and enter it when it came back on. We also were required to bring consultants from outside of the state to attempt to support the work around that. As you heard me mention earlier, our foster care reimbursement runs through SSMAS. It's an incredibly cumbersome process. It requires impeccable data entry by our staff who are so overwhelmed and overworked. And even the smallest error can create an error within the entire reimbursement system, right? It's that grain of sand analogy. You get a grain of sand in SSMAS, you get one wrong number in SSMAS, you could be looking at a $30 million issue. And so I think that is just kind of continued vulnerabilities that we have. And then kind of lastly around this, we also do not have an automated backup system within SSMAS. That one developer manually backs up the system every single day. So if we did have another period where our data was inaccessible, it would only be inaccessible as of the night before it went down. And so that when it does come back live, we would still have all of that data from the night before. And that is it's a huge undertaking to put a backup plan in place, and we are in the works around some of that. But I honestly don't know if it's even possible. And I think that is an important thing to note. So thinking a little bit more around what is the impact on our staff? I know I touched on it a bit, but I think there are some other things that we can dive into. So again, you heard me mention extracting data is very, very difficult, requires a ticket to ADS frequently. So that means our data is always delayed. I shouldn't say always, our data is often delayed. There is some stuff we do have the ability to do. The system's not structured to minimize data entry errors, right? And that is a challenge. We have to tell our system what to do. And if we tell it to do the wrong thing because we're new and we haven't had the adequate training, then the system doesn't know that and the system won't catch it. We are also not streamlined for the front end users, for the staff who are using the system. It is not easily accessible on their phone. I mean, they can pull it up, but it is really, we can't pull SSMAS, but you can pull up FSDNet. Again, very few automated links. We're having to enter data into multiple different systems, and there are a lot of redundant paper processes. This is one of those slides that I would really encourage folks to kind of pause when you're looking at the recording, or even when you're, when you're going through the slideshow once I send it along, because this is a day in the life of someone or people in FSD. And so this is designed to kind of flow down, right? So all of these processes can be happening at the same time. We have intake staff who then take a phone call from someone and enter the data into the system to help determine if that intake will be accepted or not. We then, as an investigative staff, we accept the intake. We are having to look it up. We then need to go into FSDNet, SSMAS, the DCF, the YAZI, anything that might be that a family may have touched before, and look to find that historical information. We're calling, we're texting, we're filling forms out, we're sending it to our supervisor. As a supervisor, I'm assigning a case. I'm looking again in all of those systems. I'm reading the handwritten information that my staff is providing to me. I'm having to approve it. The administrative staff is then having to make copies. They're having to print, they're having to mail. Everything is being stuck in a paper file. They have to go into SSMAS at multiple different points to enter the information because it doesn't flow from FSDNet. An ongoing caseworker now has that case. They have to then look up all of that information, again, in all of those different places to understand the history of the case. They're typing their case plans into Word. They're sending it back and forth to their supervisor. The supervisor's approving, the admin staff is then printing and mailing, or printing and emailing, and then that file goes into the paper file. And all of this is done every single case, multiple times throughout a case by every single worker. And I think that is what I really want to make sure that I'm driving home, is that our workers are touching our systems so many times because those systems do not talk to each other. This is just a little bit more detailed example about what I was just talking about with case planning. So I will just kind of brush through it very quickly, in that, again, as a caseworker, FSD is responsible for thousands of case plans a year. It is one of the most critical pieces of our work. Every family beyond an intake or an investigation has a case plan, and a youth in custody has 2 a year at minimum that are required. I am doing all of that in Word. I am then sending it back and forth to my supervisor for notes. I am then pulling the information in. And then when it is all said and done, my admin staff is sending it out to case plan participants and then sticking it in the paper file where only people in the office will have access to it. So in the event of an after hours situation where we need to know, information about a case, we are really limited to what's in FSDNet case notes, and case plans do not go into case notes. They can, right? You can copy and paste, but it is not something that we regularly do. It's not necessarily something we even encourage to be done because of the redundant nature of it. So what are some of our identified needs? Again, we need systems that meet our security requirements. We need systems that meet our state and federal requirements. We need systems that can keep up with our federal changes and allow us to actually take advantage of the federal funding available. We need systems that eliminate redundant work, and we need systems that, again, work for us, not against us. We need a comprehensive child welfare information system. We need a system that is automated, user-friendly, compliant, easy to access, easy to share, easy for our external folks to access. And again, we need a system that actually houses the information we need to work our CWIS system. Why CWIS? And just for sake of not saying the Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System multiple times, I'm going to just continue to refer to it as CWIS for the rest of the presentation. We need a system that is able to change with our requirements, right? We live in a time where the digital life cycle is so short. If you think of, what was going on 3 years ago, right? Is TikTok. Was TikTok even around 3 years ago? I don't think so. And maybe it was kind of new. It has now exploded, right? So things are happening so quick. And we are still stuck in 1983. We are still stuck in the 1990s with FSDNet, and we are not able to change with that. We need to be able to access diagnostic and treatment information for our children, youth, and families, and we cannot do that. If you asked me today, hey, can you pull a report that says how many youth we are currently serving with ADHD? I would tell you we cannot do that. The only place that information lives is in case notes and in case files, and we cannot extract it at all, period. We need to reduce the data entry and the redundancies and the pressure that our staff feel not to make a small mistake that could actually result in $1 million mistake. And we need better outcomes for the children, youth, and families served, and again, for our staff. And having access to the data that we need to understand our outcomes is the only way that we can impact outcomes, right? And so to do that now is incredibly time consuming, and we are very limited in what we are actually able to get. Why now, right? Why now? Because our systems are old. SSMIS is 40 years old, and FSDNet is a millennial, right? If you think of the millennial term, it was created in the 1990s. It is now that part of that generation. The longer we wait, the more money that we are losing, the more federal opportunities we are missing to draw down, and the more funding that federal funding we are having to pay back out of our general funds. The kind of, in my mind, almost even bigger reason, or I'd say actually equally as important, but in different ways, is that our federal government has agreed to do a 50% match with states to pay for CWIS system. So what does this mean? This means that if we get a $20 million system, FSD would only be required to pay for 10 million of it because our federal government would pick up that other 10 million. We do not know how long this opportunity will be on the table. And so if we say, all right, let's push this out 10 years, we might then be paying for a system fully out of pocket, fully out of state dollars, because that federal funding opportunity no longer exists. So that is why now. That is why it is so important that we think critically about the timing of this so that we are not losing that opportunity. In terms of CWIS cost estimates, it's really challenging. So the Administration for Children and Families, ACF, which is the federal branch that we are working with around CWIS, they do not keep kind of a here's how much systems cost, because they are so individualized to the states. That's one of the benefits of it. And so in the fall of 2023, there was a survey sent out to all of the CWIS managers to get a sense of what the CWIS impacts have been on them. And there was a wide range of responses. Not all 50 states responded. I'm not actually positive exactly how many states responded, so I don't have the N on that. But what we heard is that systems were ranging between 29 and 120 million. I don't want to shock you with that, that 120 million, because what we know is that states who jumped on board with CWIS very early on ended up, I think, paying more. And as the CWIS vendors have developed their systems, they've been able to reduce the cost a bit. So, I think what we are aware of for Vermont is that we're likely looking at something between 35 and 40 million. Again, remember, if the timing is right and we hit it when we can, we would only then be responsible for half of that funding. The other half would be able to come from our federal government. In terms of the funding currently available to us, in 2021 and 2022, we were given $2,400,000, so each of those years, for a total of $4,800,000. That carry forward funding came from budget surplus related to COVID. And something that's important to note about this is that it is not protected money. So every year we have to fight to keep this. In fact, we almost lost it this year because all extra money was supposed to be going toward the homelessness situation as folks were coming out of motels post-COVID. But we, again, because of our leadership advocacy, we're able to hold on to that money because we have been making some progress. So if we're thinking about that federal match, we right now have a little under 5 million. We have then that federal match also of 5 million. So we have a total right now of just under $10 million available for CWIS. Again, though, that money is not protected. It is not built into the budget just for this. So while we have it now and we've been drawing down from it and we've been using some of it, we don't know that it is available to us next year. Some of the current processes or some of the current kind of progress within CWIS work right now is that we are close to having a RFP, a request for proposal, out to vendors. So we were able to hire a contracted project manager and business analyst with some of that money from the CWIS budget, because we do not have the capacity for that work in-house, right? We need people who are full-time dedicated, and we do not have that within ADS, which is where those positions would be sitting. So we've hired those. We also have a core team that meets weekly, and working members of that team meet daily at times in order to move this forward as fast as we can. We did have some delays in November and December. We'd really hoped to have the RFP out this year. Unfortunately, there were several holidays in November. We had a lot of sickness happening within the team and some capacity issues, but there's still a commitment and we are still moving forward. Our project manager shared that he's never seen an RFP move this quickly. Typically this is, a year-long process, and we've done it in a few months. So again, just speaks to the dedication that we have around this. Once that RFP is out, it'll likely be out to vendors for around 60 days. We would then do scoring, demos, and then eventually get to the point of entering into a contract. So we hope next year, kind of by middle of the year, that we are in a contract with a vendor. Where will this get all of us, right? This will get us to a future state within FSD. So you remember that other visual that I showed you and walked through the manual processes. With a CWIS system, the intake staff would get the information, they'd enter it into the system would automatically send out the mandated reporter letters instead of staff having to do that. The system would automatically notify workers, both supervisory then and kind of, just on the ground staff around this. They could use the system to set up reminders, to set up contacts, to set up appointments. Right now, there are no automated reminders. That sits in Outlook if people use their Outlook calendars. That sits with the admin staff, putting a sticky note on a case file saying this is when the case plan is due, and then the caseworker tracking that information on their own in addition to everything else they're doing. A CWIS system would track that for us. It would create automated reminders. It would allow us to enter all of our case information in one place, right? This would replace FSDNet and SSMIS. It would eliminate them. It would allow us to draw down more accurate FOIA information It would allow us to verify case plans and extract data from them. It would allow us to move to electronic case filing so that we are not housing file after file after file. Some kids have multiple volumes of files. Some files are 5 to 6 inches thick. I know someone who got a paper cut on a paper file that resulted in a staph infection, and then they were out of work for a period of time, right? Like that is a risk that our workers experience because of the paper nature. A CEWA system would also support onboarding staff. I mean, there's really no training available. When I first started in the district office a little over 10 years ago, I had to ask someone a few days in what FSDNet was because people were telling me I needed to use it and I had no idea what it was. And again, that is my primary function as a worker, is to enter the information into it. It would also then allow for easier case transfers, again, better outcomes, more electronic court documents, electronic access to information around needs, services, where someone is at in their case. And it would allow folks to have one place to have all this. It would also allow our external folks to be involved. So something that is really neat with CEWA systems is that they have provider portals, they have parent portals, they have youth portals. So folks who are connected to our work could access it within the system. I will say though that those are expensive, right? Every additional portal is expensive. And while we want people to access the data, we know that that is likely not part of phase 1, 2, or even 3 of CEWA because we don't have the funding now that we need even for the most basic system. And we want to make sure that we are not falling for the sticker value of a small price, because we would hate to pay $10 million to have a system that really doesn't work better than our current one. And so that I think is important to note too. Yes, there are some for 10 or 12 million. Yes, they will not meet our needs. And that is important, right? And so we need to be thinking globally about this. If we want other people to have access to their data, if we want youth to know kind of what's important about their case, we need to have the funding available to create those portals for youth to then access it. If we want parents to do that, we want our providers to be able to share notes with us rather than having to live in our paper file or not having access to them. We need these portals that folks can enter into. We need a new system. We need to support our families. We need to support our children. We need to support our youth, and we need to support our staff. Thank you. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to come here and just really share what our staff hold every single day with our systems.
Carlie, thank you so much for illustrating this so well to all of us. I know we're at time, and I can collect questions afterwards to bring back to the department to bring back to all of you. I also want to just quickly give Matthew Bernstein the opportunity to say a few words as we close out.
Thanks, Amy. And that was amazing, Carlie. I learned so much, and I've been, diving into this so much. And I appreciate folks letting me have the last word. I just wanted to say a couple of things. First, again, thank you, Carlie. That was a lot of incredible information. And second, I think I wanted to shout out Kid Safe Collaborative and Sally, who's here, because and the Vermont Citizens Advisory Board, because I think they've been really carrying the work on this issue for a long time, and I've definitely learned a lot from them as well. And then I just want to say we have our annual report is quite overdue and is so close to being ready. And we have, when it is ready, you will all have it, and it has a big section on the data system that I think goes really well with what Carlie said. There's some overlap, but it's not the same information. So 100%. So stay tuned for that. I want you to have it, and we're doing as best we can on that. So and I just want to add a couple more things. One, I think this is a hard issue. I just want to name this because I think it's a hard issue, because part of the problem here is the optics of DCF, of millions of dollars going to DCF when our constituency, children, youth, and families, need so much help and support. And $10 million would do a lot in the communities. So I just wanted to name that and say, think that is true. And first, I think that's why, and I'll come back to that, that's why the money for this system from this office's perspective cannot, should not, must not come out of this, be administered in this zero-sum way where the powers that be say to DCF, okay, fine, you can do a new CWIS, but that means, what are you gonna cut? You tell us, right? It has to be a collective effort, and it goes far beyond and above DCF to AHS, to the governor, to the legislature. And I mean, the courts don't have a direct say in this, of course, but the courts, I know the Vermont Supreme Court is very interested in this issue too, and it directly affects them. So, I think it's important that this not be looked at as just a DCF issue, because if DCF is just made to say, you have to find this in your budget, that is on the backs of the children, youth, and families that we represent, and so that can't happen. And then also, I wanted to say that this money, it does support children, youth, and families, even if it seems like it doesn't, because of some of the things Carlie touched on. And in our report, there's a lot of more information about some of the unique programs that are opening up. And to Carlie's point about evolving technology, believe it or not, law is also evolving. And while Congress isn't necessarily getting a lot of statutes written, the regulations and the rules are changing fast. And so in the last year, there have been 3 or 4 major changes to federal regulations and rules that open up avenues to do creative programs, such as for a family who touches the child welfare system, federal money can be used with a match, and it's complicated, to support civil legal services for families. And that can include housing relief, public benefits. It could include relief from protection. It can include a whole host of issues, basically, so that would help fund legal support services that could include social workers, peer supports. And so that's just one example of programs that this would open up, in addition to a lot of the issues Carlie talked about. So, I think this money, it can't be looked at simplistically like this money is going to DCF and not to families. It's going to both. And it has to be new money, right? But it definitely goes to support both. And then just a couple more things real quick. One is, I think the risk assessment piece has to be factored into the cost of this. And we talk about this in our report, and it's a sensitive issue, but we are a sitting duck for a cyber attack, and there are plenty of recent issues in the media in Vermont, right? That we know that this is a real thing, and that has to be factored in. That is a cost. And then on the plus side, there's certain other things that DCF's trying to do in RFPs that they're putting out. Where the challenge is there's nobody bidding on the RFP, right? Or there's nobody to staff the position. And that's not the issue here. The issue here from my perspective is money and will. And we have the will, as you just experienced over the last hour. And if we have the money, then we can find a vendor. And it's not just any vendor, right? And we have wisdom to bring, because, this is not, the CWIS systems are a well-tread area by now. There are plenty, every state is required to have one. And so there's, this is an area where it's not starting from scratch at this point. That's one of the advantages to being a late mover. And while, of course, we would sort of be starting over, there's real advantages to designing a system from the ground up. So if there's a problem where, what's the only missing thing is money, and so many good things open up, that to me, again, it's a problem. It's really a problem of will, not money, right? But the money can be found, and there's plenty of times when if we agree on an issue is so crucial, we find the money. And so I think that is well within the possibility. So I'll leave it there. I could go on all day, and I thank you, Amy, for the airtime, and thank you especially, Carlie, because I think it takes a lot of courage to do the work you've done and to present all of this to us. And I can say it's truly it's honestly not to be too cheesy, but I think it's inspiring in terms of like when we partner with folks to solve a hard problem. It's clear that DCF wants to solve this problem, and so I think we all need to just rally and help them solve the problem, again, to support children, youth, and families. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And as we wrap up, I just want to draw attention to a comment that I put in the chat around immediate opportunities for advocacy. So right now it is an opportunity for each of you to click on that link. It literally takes less than 2 minutes to share your priorities for the governor's budget process, and then to continue to advocate for this as we move into the legislative process. We want to make sure that we're protecting the money that's already there, and then that we're advocating for funding this new system at a level that matches the need. And so if folks want to reach out to me, I'll also follow up from this webinar if folks want to reach out for more opportunities for advocacy, but this is a really quick, simple one that you can all do right now. And then I look forward to sharing more opportunities in the near future. So thank you again, Carlie. Thank you to all of you for your time today. And I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Yeah, same again. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Matthew, for touching on some of those. I know, like I said, I used up all of the time. There's so much more I could say. So if there's additional questions you have about stuff I touched on or stuff I didn't, like Amy said, please send those to her. She'll send them our way. I think, I could talk about CWIS and our current systems all day, every day, if you're interested in that. In fact, I do spend a lot of my time doing that. And so just any opportunity we have to continue to partner in these different ways is just a beautiful opportunity. So again, thank you. Thank you for your commitment to the children, youth, and families we serve, as well as to kind of understanding the needs of our staff. Truly grateful.